Dagney, Faulk, and I were very interested in evaluating the effect of the Regional Cities Initiative, which was a 2015 Pence administration program in Indiana to funnel about $40 million each to two or three regions of the state that were lagging. They were urban areas, metropolitan statistical areas that were lagging in economic growth. And it was an interesting area to study because it had all of the makings of a natural experiment of counties that would receive the funding that had applied for it in a competitive process, and then counties that applied but did not receive the funding as a control group. And then the opportunity to have different types of control groups for the rest of the state as a whole, and maybe the rest of the state, not including the fast growing Indianapolis area, to sort of see if this program that targeted Rust Belt cities for growth might be effective in generating some GDP, income, or home price growth across the board. So Dagney and I really focused on the methodology here. The methodology are really three forms of method that we use to evaluate this. The first one is a difference in difference in a two-way fixed effect panel model. That's the experimental characteristic of this, that we could test the effect on these 18 counties with different that's a treatment group with different control groups, again being the counties that attempted to receive funding but did not, the remainder of Indiana, or the remainder of Indiana minus the fast growing urban center of Indianapolis. The second model we used in this process was an event study that is both good at sort of determining the effect of a discrete event and the cumulative growth afterwards, as well as providing a very attractive visual for the potential effects, including statistical significance. And then the third method we used was really a robustness test of a random growth model to see whether or not there were some pre-trends that existed in that differed between the places that were growing and not growing. And for data, we were very fortunate. These are publicly available data through the Bureau of Economic Analysis for our per capita income and our personal income, per capita income, and GDP data. The BLS data is available for employment, and then the Federal Housing Finance Authority gives us really good home price indices of sale prices of homes. Those are annual data. We had quarterly data. We appealed to the quarterly workforce indicators at the longitudinal employer household database that's run jointly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census. And that's really good for detecting sort of more frequent potential effects. Are there effects on construction that came up, grew quickly in the months after receipt, and then declined over a couple of years? And in annual data, we might not have been able to detect that. With the quarterly data, we were able to do so. And that really gave us a framework, three different models with different assumptions that we could corroborate results with, and then a rich set of data sources at the county level to give us to populate those models for these tests. Main findings in this work were across the board, across all three of these models, a small bump in employment. It's statistically significant in most of the environments. The only place where we didn't see big effects that were statistically significant when our control group included Indianapolis, which has been outgrowing Indiana, capturing 105% of all the net population and employment growth over the past 2 decades. In terms of GDP growth, the two models presented as employment growth and GDP growth across the board. It was statistically significant. The effects were modest in the sense that overall, as a measure of overall GDP, but fairly large relative to the state investment in this. So $37 million per county, when there was only about $126 million overall distributed across 18 counties. So that's a fairly big GDP effect, and that was permanent. We didn't find an effect on home price indices. So we saw findings that are consistent with a fairly elastic housing supply in these areas, which is good news for the Rust Belt, which oftentimes has an inelastic housing supply. So workers can't get real gains from higher incomes. We did not detect a lot of sectoral adjustment, except for construction. In the first couple of years, we saw a pretty big spike in construction, which any economist would anticipate. That was consistent with the infrastructure and building heavy nature of this spending. The good news is that after that construction spending dissipated after about 6 to 8 quarters, we saw overall employment continue to remain robust through the rest of the sample period. So we're pretty pleased across these three modeling approaches that we captured something real that was happening as a consequence of this program targeting quality of life infrastructure in Indiana. There are a number of policy recommendations that we would offer both for Indiana and for other states considering place-based policies, which most states probably should. For Indiana, the states continued what are called READY grants, which are just newer generations of this regional cities grants. They didn't start till about 2021, and we just went through another round of them. So we're anxious to evaluate in a few years whether or not those programs, which were similarly designed, would have an effect. For other states, I think the design elements of the Regional Cities Initiative are thoughtful in a couple of ways. The first one is this is really targeted at quality of life investments. So things like infrastructure for housing or recreational activities, educational investments, both in programs and facilities to sort of tailor to the local labor demand needs. And then, of course, there was a lot of recreational spending on parks and trails and other things of that nature. The process of the grant evaluation really allowed communities to tell the states what they needed. What are the particular investments that they were lacking? And if you talk with or go through a research process, which we've done in a different study of these participants, they almost routinely say this process was eye-opening because it let us better understand where our county fit into the overall economic development aspirations of the region. So it was a pretty collaborative place-based policy. And with that, I think what we can tell states that are considering this is that start with an inexpensive program. In this case, $126 million in a state with a $44 billion a year biennial budget, a pretty focused attention on infrastructure and quality of life, but allowed to be flexible by regions. And then I think I would argue that follow-up and analysis, both before and after the investment is made, helps give better answers to you and other states that may be considering these policies. So, across the board, just to recap, design something that allows people in the local area to tell you what they need, focus dollars on that, and then test it pretty effectively before and after so that you have some real sense of what the economic effects might be.